Hello everybody and welcome to this EduSat session on the elective English course called Understanding Prose, EEG 5. Let me begin by introducing myself. I am Dr. Neera Singh from the Faculty of English here at IGNOU, and I am the coordinator of this course, Understanding Prose, EEG 5. It is my privilege to have here today in the studios Professor Hema Raghavan, who will be sharing her expertise with us today. Professor Raghavan is an eminent scholar and academician with a number of books and articles to her credit. She retired as principal of Gargi College, Delhi University, and was also the Dean of Students' Welfare for Delhi University. Subsequently, Professor Raghavan was Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Rai University as well as Senior Vice President of the Amity University. Currently, Professor Raghavan is the Content Advisor to a software firm. With so many achievements under her belt, I really consider it an honor to have Professor Raghavan here with us today, and I'm really looking forward to have her speak to us about this course. I extend a very warm welcome to you, Professor Raghavan.
Thank you.
Welcome. Now, before I request Dr. Raghavan to start speaking to us, I would like to very briefly go over the course contents of this course so that the students who have joined us today can get a very brief kind of an overall picture of what is involved in this course. So, very briefly, let's just look at the outline of the course. This course consists of 8 blocks, and the course is divided into 2 parts. The first part, that is blocks 1, 2 and 3, deal with the varieties of prose, and the second part deals with the various prose forms. As you can see, blocks 1, 2 and 3 deal with descriptive, narrative and expository prose respectively. These are the 3 varieties of prose that we have taken up. Now, blocks 4 to 8 deal with the various forms of prose. Block 4 is devoted to the short story, and we've taken up 4 short stories to give you a fair idea of the short story form. These are, I'll just go over the names of the stories. These are A Cup of Tea by Catherine Mansfield, After 20 Years by O. Henry, The Lost Child by Mulkraj Anand, and Javni by Raja Rao. Now, blocks 5 and 6 are devoted to the novel, and we have taken up 2 novels for detailed discussion. These are The Mayor of Casterbridge in block 5. This is of course by Thomas Hardy, and we've taken up R.K. Narayan's A Tiger for Malgudi. Now, block 7 is devoted to the essay, and we've taught you 5 essays by Addison, Charles Lamb, Stevenson, Chesterton and George Orwell. And finally, in block 8, we've taken up biography and autobiography as prose forms by giving you excerpts from Boswell's Life of Johnson and the autobiographies of Nehru and Bertrand Russell. So, this is what we've basically covered in this course. But let's really start at the very beginning. What is it that constitutes prose? How do we define prose? Professor Raghavan, would you shed some light on this, please?
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Neera. Here I am not here to teach you how to write a short story or how to write a novel. You are going to read all those things in your different blocks. But how do you really say that this is prose, this is poetry? Basically, our attempt is to explain to you what goes by the name prose, thereby enabling you to understand it, enabling you to appreciate a prose form of writing. Let me start with this thing. When I was asked to make this presentation, automatically I went to Oxford Advanced Learners English Dictionary, and I just looked at the word prose, and I was surprised that the definition that was given for prose is written or spoken language that is not in verse that is poetry. In other words, what it meant was that if you have to understand prose, you should understand what is verse and then come to the understanding that a prose is something that is not written in the form of verse. Again I said, alright, let me go to the other link in Oxford Dictionary, and this is to see what is the meaning of prosaic, because very often we come across the word, oh, she is a very prosaic writer, she speaks rather prosaic. Now prosaic means very often it is used to say anything that is dull, anything that is ordinary, anything that lacks imagination. So from this dictionary, Oxford's dictionary, I came to this conclusion: 3 forms. 1. Prose is a form of writing that is not arranged in a regular rhyme or a rhythm. There is no rhythm scheme, there is no rhyme. I will give you an example. Jack and Jill went up a hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down, broke his crown. Jill came tumbling after. Now what do you see? The poet, whosoever has written this, is very careful to make the connection between Jill and hill, connection between water and after, last down and crown. There is a very conscious attempt on the part of the poet to see that poetry is written in a rhyme scheme. The second, and when you come to prose, we find that we do not have either this rhythmic pattern nor the rhyme scheme. Does it mean that prose writers do not have any structure? No, they do have a structure. Now that structure consists of paragraphs and sentences which taken together form a composite unit. Now when you are going to write an essay, a prose essay, you will be asked to write a prose essay in say 5 paragraphs or 6 paragraphs, which means the paragraph should have some kind of a link. You cannot start one paragraph, first paragraph, and then go on to some other thing in the second, go on to yet another thing in the third, and there will be no link at all. So when we are writing prose, the most important thing is the structure, and the structure is in terms of the link between the different paragraphs. The opening and the concluding paragraph almost come a full cycle. So that's the first point that I would like to say. So there is this kind of a structured form including sentences and paragraphs. And also there has to be what I call a logical development. So if you have poetry as something that has a rhyme scheme, has a rhythmic pattern, you will find that prose has got a logical pattern. The second thing that we found from the Oxford Dictionary is, writing, prose is any form of writing that does not call for an exercise of imagination. I am rather surprised, because how can you write if you don't have imagination? For anything, whether you write prose or poetry or drama or essay, you have to have imagination. It is a key to any form of writing. For example, you are reading Tiger for Malgudi by R.K. Narayan. R.K. Narayan wrote this splendid novel Malgudi Days, and what has he done? He has set the entire thing in an imaginary town called Malgudi. There is no such town that exists in India, in any part of India. But the only thing is, he has exercised his imagination to create a town called Malgudi. And what is important is that this is an imagination that a prose writer is expected to exercise. Mind you, I just want you to bear in mind that please never use the word prosaic imagination. That means it is without imagination or it is a dull. It is imagination that is required by a prose writer. That is what you call the imagination of prose.
Right. Dr. Raghavan, I'll definitely be very careful when I use this term prosaic imagination after you've explained the finer distinctions. But could you sort of elaborate a bit upon the finer distinctions of prose imagination and poetic imagination?
Yeah, it's a good point, because it also helps you to understand prose. poetic, when you say poetic, it means something that is imaginative, something that is graceful, something that is flowing, and something that is full of feeling. You all know that Wordsworth is a great writer, a great poet. He has written a number of poems, and even a small poem, a short poem like the Daffodils. He goes and sees the daffodils. He feels a great feeling of imagination. He feels a love for daffodils. He is able to describe daffodils, but he uses what you call the imagination, which is a continuous, spontaneous flow of the emotions and feelings within him. Now, I don't say that a prose writer does not express feelings, but when he expresses feelings, when the prose writer writes, the feelings are expressed in a very controlled, restrained manner. It is not a spontaneous overflow, it is a contained, logical, restrained manner. Reason, so that comes to the major point. Reason and logic, they form the cornerstone of any imagination that is exercised by a prose writer. So if poetry is the vehicle of emotions and feelings, then we look at prose. It is a vehicle for reason and logic. I am going to ask you a question. Suppose you are going to write a scientific treatise. Can you write it in poetry? Or if you want to express a mathematical theorem, can we write it in verse form? No, we need prose. You can't argue in poetry, in poetic form. Arguments, debates, exposition, description, scientific discoveries, philosophic writings, technical writings, political statements, policies of political parties, policies of the government, all these require three basic things: clarity, logic, order. So here you have the essential qualities of prose: clarity, logic and order.
Professor Raghavan, may I interrupt you here
Yeah.
for a moment?
Yeah.
There are certain innovations which have sort of come in recent times.
Yeah.
This brings to mind Vikram Gates' The Golden Gate.
Right.
Now that has been written in verse. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, that's a very, it's a very interesting kind of writing by Vikram Seth, The Golden Gate. And if you have ever seen 18th century poetry, which is like Dryden and Pope, again you will find that heroic poetry or Golden Gate Vikram Seth, they all do subscribe to what you call poetry, but then they are written in such a way that that poetry approximates to prose. It is a very, very good example. Golden Gate is in a sonnet form, that is, 8-line stanza.
Yes.
And it is written in a sonnet form, and you have the rhyme scheme, but it is an excellent example of a story written in verse, but which approximates to prose. It is the same with Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock, which is written in the 18th century, where you have the use of heroic couplets, but at the same time you will find that when you read, and when you read it aloud, you are almost reading it as if you are reading a prose piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, could you just shed some light on when and why the prose form developed at a certain period of British history?
Yes, you see, initially I would say that even as early as the 15th, 16th century, we have writers like Bacon and Sidney who used a prose form to write literary criticism or short essays. But actually, as you correctly asked me, when did it develop? We will find that 18th century is always known as the golden age of prose. It's a very special kind of a thing that is given. This is the kind of a definition that you give to the 18th century literature in England, that it is the golden age of prose. And prior to that, as I said, in up to the 18th century, up to the run up to the 18th century, say starting from the 14th century up to the 18th century, you have brilliant poets like Chaucer, Shakespeare, Spenser, Marlowe, a whole lot of poets who wrote this beautiful, great romantic poetry. In fact, this period, the Elizabethan period or the 16th century, is always called the Romantic Age number 1. And so it is because the romantic poetry, feelings were expressed, emotions were expressed, love was expressed, therefore it is called the Romantic Age. But in the 18th century, because human mind is such that it cannot all the time accept one form of writing. it always wants change. And when you look at the whole of history of literature, you will find that if a period is known for poetry, the next stage is known for prose, the next stage will be known for poetry. It goes in cycles. So you will find that, as I said, up to the 18th century it was great poetry. Then you have the 18th century prose. Then 19th century you will find Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, Shelley writing great romantic poetry. So you will have this kind of alternate genre coming. 18th century, I would say, is the golden age of prose, when you see the distinct shift from poetry to prose.
And why was that?
Well, that is, it's very important to understand why this shift took place. Once I give you the historical reason, then you will understand the characteristics of prose. First point, 18th century, it saw the rise of what you today call the middle class. Before that, it is only the wealthy class, the aristocratic class, the royalty. They had the privilege of learning, they had the privilege of reading, they had the privilege of knowing about things. So everything that was written prior to that, even Dryden and Pope, when they started writing, the poetry was addressed to the royalty. But with the 18th century, you will find that England suddenly shifted from a political system of absolute monarchy to a parliamentary system of governance. So you have a new kind of a middle class coming in. They were the voters. They were going to vote. And this middle class also said, we want to be like the aristocratic class. We want also to learn. And therefore, there was a sudden love for learning among the new class, and they wanted books not to be written in Latin and Greek, but written in simple English, simple direct prose that they can understand. So you will find that you have this Addison's Spectator papers. Okay, you will find that the 18th century that saw the rise of the periodical essay, and the main objective was, well, 1, instruction, 2, entertainment, informative, enjoyment. Both should be there. So the founding father, as I said, was Joseph Addison, and you know what he said? I want to be remembered in the future that I was the one who brought philosophy from the library shelves onto the coffee houses and tea tables. Now this is a very nice thing. Everybody should have access to these books.
Yes.
So he said that I want to write something, a new form of writing that is simple, direct, easy, enjoyable, humorous, witty, at the same time informative. So that's the first point, that is the rise of the middle class wanting something to read. Second, I said parliamentary system. Parliamentary system threw up two kinds of parties. One, the Tory, the other, the Whigs. Today they go by the name the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. And all these political statements, parties' statement, their policies, their appeal to the electorate, they could be done only through elegant, simple, clear prose. Political debate could only be conducted in communicative prose. The third, somewhere in 1660, that is towards the end of 17th century, there came the Royal Academy of Science. This was, established in England, and this was age that saw the development of science. And again I would like to say, all scientific principles, you cannot have it other than in prose. They require clear, unambiguous prose. So scientific writings demanded these logical derivations, clarity of thought expressed with precision. So prose became the natural choice. The next reason, fourth one, the middle class wanted entertainment. So they said, we want serial novels through these periodical essays or these weekly magazines. So the novel as a genre was, in the 18th century, it was the form that was accepted. Though it started as early as the late 17th century by Daniel Defoe, you must have heard Robinson Crusoe,
yes.
But it continued into the 18th century, and we also call the 18th century as the age of English novel. Again, what surfaced was delightful, readable prose that could be enjoyed by the rising middle class. Point number 5, art of letter writing. Now today, you all do SMS messages. You don't know, and you must have forgotten, there is something called the letter which can be sent, lengthy letters. You neither have the time to read those letters nor the time to write those letters. But in the 18th century, the art of letter writing was there, and it contributed to the growth of prose. And in fact, some of the novels that you read in the 18th century were actually written in the form of letters. A writing to B, B writing to C, C writing to A. The entire story progressed through the letters. Literary criticism. We hear about it. How do you actually understand and appreciate a novel? How do you appreciate poetry? Literary criticism. This took strong roots. We have Samuel Johnson, who you are going to read the Life of Johnson by Boswell, and Samuel Johnson was the one who wrote the lives of the poets. That is, it's a kind of a historical, biographical kind of a writing, and it was the first time that you have the lives of the poets, literary criticism coming to the fore. And mind you, I started with a dictionary. Do you know who was the first one to bring out a dictionary? It was Samuel Johnson in the 18th century. So, Dictionary of English Words. The last point was that prose had what you call the very objective kind of writing. There were also some writers whom you call the personal writers or the personal essayists. They wrote about their own feelings, their own emotions, their own whims and fancies. They were very, very popular in the 19th century, but it started in the 18th century itself, and thus prose developed in the 18th century, and it became an approved, accepted, much appreciated form of writing, and it reflected upon the social, political, scientific, cultural and literary aspects of the society.
That was really interesting, Dr. Agban. The reasons that you've given for the rise of prose, I mean, it's very clear, chronologically very clear, why there was this development of prose. Before we go further, let's just briefly recapitulate the various reasons for the development of prose. First was, as you said, the rise of the middle class. Secondly, the parliamentary system of government. Thirdly, the development of science. Fourthly, the demand for entertainment. Fifth was the art of letter writing. Sixth was literary criticism. And seventh reason was to record the personal opinions and feelings, etc. of the people. Now, these were the reasons for the development of prose. Now, could you sum up the different forms of the prose genres and the characteristics of prose writing?
See, you have given a very neat summing up of the historical reasons which contributed to the development of prose, and from that you can easily deduce that prose is something that is to be written in a very, very simple, clear, elegant style. And therefore there came these different forms of writing, the prose genre, which you said novels, short stories, literary criticism, history, biographies. Even books were written on social etiquettes, books were written to explain philosophical treatises, scientific papers. So what we read is, it's a very interesting thing. You need a straightforward prose. At the beginning I said, when I compared prose and poetry, I made this observation that you have to have a very logical development in prose. The paragraph number, each paragraph will contain only one point. And when you are reading a book, please make it a point that you will have a pen, paper and a pencil. You will read one paragraph, find out what is the major point that has been written in that. You go to the second paragraph and see what is the major point brought about by the second, the third, the fourth. Then go back and look at all the points that you have made and see whether there is a link. If there is a link, that is excellent writing. If there is no link, then you will begin to wonder what kind of a prose I have been reading. Understanding prose is to understand that there is a straightforward development of prose when you write any prose piece of writing, any piece of prose writing. And so there is a logical way of movement from beginning to end. And as I said, the language has to be precise, elegant, clear, and I repeat, it flows with a forward movement. It doesn't mean that you don't write about the past. That doesn't mean that you are taking backward movement. The movement you need to say it is a forward movement. It means that it moves from one point to the next, to the next, to the next in a very clear way. And you all know, and by this time, since you are students of elective English, you know that all kinds of writing, whether it is English writing or Hindi writing or Sanskrit writing, you have the two components. One, the theme, or what you call the content, or what you call the subject matter. Then you have how do you express it, the style, the manner of presentation. It is here that you have the three different types of prose, the varieties of prose that you call. One is the descriptive prose, the narrative prose, and the expository prose. And you have these different forms: prose story written in prose, novel written in prose, biographies, scientific treatises, etc. It doesn't mean that for one particular form of writing, to write novel you will only use one form of prose, narrative prose. No. Very often you will find that there are mixed varieties of prose in the same kind of writing. So a novel may have a descriptive prose, may also have a narrative prose. So that's a kind of a thing that you must keep in mind, that even when you, for convenience sake, divide the different varieties of prose into descriptive or expository or narrative, you will find that you do not, when you are writing a novel or a short story, you are not going to stick to one form of prose. There will be the overlapping of different styles.
Professor Raghavan, could you give us an example of descriptive prose?
Well, since you are all doing R.K. Narayan, I think nothing better than Narayan's Malgudi days. And as I told you some time back, there is no town that exists called Malgudi in India. It is a fictional town, and I do not know, you are all very young, but 10-15 years back, this Malgudi Days was actually produced by Doordarshan. It was a TV serial.
Yes.
And they brought Malgudi. The point is, what I would like to say is that the TV producers were able to portray an authentic picture of Malgudi as conceived by R.K. Narayan and presented it on the TV serial in a visual form. And it is a tribute to Narayan's prose style that was able to create imaginatively a small village town, and it helped the reader to visualize such a town. That's a very good form of descriptive prose. I want to give you another example. We have this writer Bill Atkin, and he writes about his journey right from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, and he loves going by train. And he always describes the train journey that he undertook from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from east to west, from north to south, the whole of India. And his is what I call a narrative prose. Narrative prose because it is written with such a rare simplicity. When you read it, you will never like to put the book down. It is a beautiful kind of writing, and it is written with such grace and such ease. And every town, every hillside, every stream that are in different parts of India, they come visually alive when you read this book before our eyes. So this is a very good example of a descriptive prose style, and which takes me to the point, the description is factual, the description is photographic. You don't have to take a camera and click. When you write, it has got that photographic presentation of the town or the stream or the river. In the case of Narayan, slightly different. It is imaginative. There is no Malgudi. But he imagines Malgudi. So it is imaginative and it is delightful. In the case of Bill Atkin, it is something that is factual and that is photographic. So this is where I find that the two different forms of same narrative prose writing can be seen.
We also have this Canadian novelist Margaret Lawrence. She has also created an imaginary town called Manawaka, and she's based 5 of her Canadian novels there. So it's the same like Narayan. She's also built this imaginary town which actually does not exist anywhere in Canada, but she's given such graphic pictures of it that it immediately you can visualize the entire town, just as you can visualize a place called Malgudi, even though it does not exist.
Absolutely right.
So, now this was about descriptive prose. Professor Raghavan, what is narrative prose, and why is it suitable for stories, etc., as the name implies?
So narration, so you use it for stories and novels. And any novel or story, I think you will find that the most important focus is the novel. All other things take, the novel has to, the story has to move. And the flow of the story cannot be stopped, cannot be arrested, otherwise you put down the book. So you take the book and the story just moves on. And it has to go in a sequential manner, sequence after sequence after sequence. I'm not saying that it should be chronological manner. Sometimes, what happens is that when he is writing, he writes about something that happened in the past, something that will happen in the future. It can be predicted, it can be anticipated. But remember, when you are reading the story, you are reading the story and the story is happening right at this moment when you are reading. And therefore, the writer cannot confuse you as he takes you zooms between the past, the present and the future. So this is a narrative prose. It gives him this flexibility to move. But at the same time, it also means that he has to be very, very clear. It is his insistence on clarity, insistence on order, logic. The narrative prose manages to maintain that continuity without confusion. And another thing, this thing that I didn't mention earlier, is any prose writer, I told you about personal essays. I will come to that also, I'll explain that. Prose writing needs a certain degree of objectivity, especially when you are writing a novel. It is one thing to say that I write a novel about myself. It's an autobiographical novel. But even when I am writing about myself, I will be very objective about what I write about Dr. Neera Singh. It has to be an objectivity. In prose writing, you have to have this kind of an objectivity. In novel writing, you have to have this objectivity. Along with objectivity, there has to be some kind of a detachment. You cannot just immediately say that I am absolutely in love with the character that I have created. It is for the reader to love that character, not the writer. So, when you talk about poetry, the poet pours out his heart. He listens to a song of a nightingale, it makes an impression on him, and he pours out the song in the form of a song to the nightingale. But here, the prose writer and the novelist in particular, they distance themselves from the story that they are writing, they are removed from the story that they are writing, and make their characters give different perspectives. Therefore, what you call a narrative prose style is something that takes the story forward, that moves the story without a stop, without a pause, and at the same time it includes different points of view of different characters.
But would you say that story writers don't use any imagery in their narration?
Well, I think they should use imagery, otherwise I don't think you can bring in a very authentic kind of a description. The important aspect is, yes, the use of images, but as I said, the story is the main focus for a novelist or a short story writer. You have to create the ambience for the story. You have to create the right atmosphere for the story. So how do you do it? You can use the visual image and what you call the oral image. That is something that is that can be heard and something that can be visualized. Now, you compare poetic imagery with the prose imagery, you will find the difference. In poetry, the language that is used is imaginative language, and it produces pictures in the minds of the reader. I gave you the example of daffodils. When Wordsworth writes about daffodils, now you and I might would have never seen the daffodil flower, or we might have seen or might have not noticed it. When Wordsworth writes the poem, the daffodils comes alive into your mind because you, in your imagination, you are able to recreate that daffodils. Now in prose, the images are realistic. As I said, they are photographic and do not call for exercise of your imagination. Very simply I will say, if I have to write about, I see balloons at the end of the Republic Day celebration, balloons are just left to float aloft in the sky, and the commentator who is giving the commentary, in chiseled prose will write, now look at the balloons going up in the sky, you have the red, the blue, the green, the white, and there is the flag of India coming. So he gives the description of the balloons realistically, almost photographically. Even if it is not seen on the television monitor, you can listen to it on the radio. The same, if a poet were to write about these balloons, the different colors of balloons, then what does he say? He will write simply like this. Look, the balloons in the sky dancing like a rainbow. Just brings that. Neither red, blue, green, Vibgyor color is not mentioned. dancing like a rainbow,
So
and flowing along.
Colours come to mind.
Color comes to mind.
Yes,
So
visualize
the
it.
poet demands the exercise of the reader's imagination. The prose writer demands the exercise of the mind to get an authentic visual picture. So whether it is a fictitious narrative, fictitious experience, or it is an actual experience, the reader should be able to experience it mentally.
Okay. Now, could you tell us about expository prose, and when do we use this kind of prose?
Well, in Unit 10 of Block 3, you have been given in the very first page, you have been given the various techniques of exposition. Now, exposition, its chief, as the term itself says, the focus is on explanation. Now, when you are going to explain anything, a science topic, or a technical solution, or a philosophical inquiry, or a social problem, something related to gender, what do you do? When you are actually doing it, you always use the cause and the effect analysis. What brought about this? What is the effect of this? The cause effect analysis is done. Or you deduce very rationally from point 1 to point 2 to point 3. You use arguments, and then you make a synthesis of all these things to put forward what you call the exposition and what you need as the expository prose. So, you find that the writer, whom we call the expository writer, the expository prose writer, he incorporates the three different styles of prose: the descriptive, the narrative in terms of logical development, and expository. And mind you, when you are using expository prose, you have to be absolutely correct to the last detail. There is no room for ambiguity. It has to be clear, it has to be factual, it has to be truthful, and it has to move forward in a sequential logical development. And therefore we find a very formal style is used in expository prose. In other words, when you read an essay, scientific essay, or when you read a philosophical essay, you will find that the writer is very careful. He uses apt words, the appropriate words. The statements are very precise. There is no exaggeration. Not a single word you will say has been overused. There is no redundancy in those words, and therefore the presentation is what I call the Spartan style. Spartan means something that is simple without any frills attached to it. That is expository prose.
That was very interesting, Dr. Agwan. So basically we see that the nature and characteristics of descriptive, narrative and expository prose are fairly different from each other. A brief recap. Now, descriptive writing. See, descriptive writing describes things as it can be the description of a person, landscape or event. As far as narrative writing is concerned, it is a description of events, external or internal. Internal in the sense that, it could describe the internal thoughts, feelings or emotions of people. Now, in that sense, descriptive writing is more passive and narrative writing is more active.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And as far as expository writing is concerned, it deals in definitions, explanations or interpretations. The main aim is to explain and clarify. However, what really needs to be borne in mind here is that this division of prose into three kinds, descriptive, narrative and expository, is a very rough one. There are no rigid lines of demarcation between the three. Any piece of writing, for that matter, every piece of writing does contain a judicious blend of maybe 2 or 3 of these writings. A novel can begin as a descriptive novel to set the ambience, to provide the setting of the novel, but then it goes on to narrative prose. So there is a judicious blend of all the 3 varieties of prose. Okay, I think we've had a rather interesting session with Professor Raghavan, who explained to us the very basic definition of prose and its various varieties. Then she also gave the reasons for the rise and development of the prose form, and these were discussed in a fairly detailed form. And then the finer distinctions between narrative prose, descriptive prose, and expository prose were explained. I would really like to thank Professor Raghavan for being here with us today and for sharing her knowledge with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Raghavan.